Greenwich Time Podcast. Welcome to the Greenwich Time Podcast. My name is David and I'm your host. In this podcast, you get to know a little bit more about meditation and you got to know also people who practice Sahaja Yoga for a while. Today we have Tim Bruce. Tim Bruce, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you very much.
So Tim, you can start by telling us a little bit about yourself, what you do for a profession, and a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I've been meditating for a very long time, probably about, what year is it? About 34 years, I think, 35 years. So quite a long time. So I was quite young when I came to it. And about the same time, I started to get established in my profession, which has always had acting and singing in parallel, basically. So at that time, I was more focusing on singing, but these days I'm more focused on acting. And I basically meditate to keep some kind of balance in what is otherwise an extremely unbalanced profession. You know, it's feast or famine quite often, although I've managed to kind of, in a way, mitigate that by diversifying in lots of different areas, so that generally everything's kind of, there's something going on somewhere most of the time. Even now I've managed to keep busy. That's more because I've been focusing on audiobooks. So having that ability to stick to your center is essential, absolutely essential in a profession which, by its definition, likes to go to extremes. I mean, drama is about conflict, often, or conflict resolution. That's the end of the story. And if it's the same old thing, people aren't interested. So you have to keep pushing the boundaries and making it more sensational or more violent or more whatever, to maintain public interest. But that's another discussion.
So how old were you? I mean, have you chosen to do acting based on what you experienced during meditation, or not necessarily?
I was likely a born realized, so that meant that I had this capacity already as a child when I was born. And I had the good fortune to live near Sri Mataji, who was the founder of Sahaja Yoga, when I was about 7 or 8, and I had very strong vibrational experiences, a feeling of cool breeze on the hands, and also metaphysical experiences, you could say, around the age of sort of 7, 8, around when I lived in Oxted, Surrey, Hurst Green, around that area, at that time in the mid-1970s. But I didn't come to Sahaja Yoga as such, and as it were, learn about the techniques, and become more conscious of what it was that was going on inside, in the chakras and everything else, until 1987. So it was literally a few days before my 20th birthday when I first met Sri Mataji at a public program in London, and started to learn more about how to master it, I suppose. As opposed to just kind of passively experience it, albeit in a spontaneous way. But it's different to learn from Sri Mataji, from the very source of that, and to understand what it is and how it works, and how to improve ourselves, our families, our society around us, and basically the whole of humanity beyond that. Mm-hmm. So I came to that at an early age, basically. So I was 19 when I first came to Sahaja Yoga, and it's changed over the years, but not massively, not in its direction of ascent, one could say. It's become much more numerous. There are many more countries now where it's practiced. I mean, some say maybe 150 countries. I don't know, but I mean, certainly most countries that you go to, it's possible to go to either an online meeting or a public meeting somewhere. I think there are literally only a few countries in Africa that don't have it, and even those have had it in passing to some extent. It's just not been established there. So it has become much more of a universal, global phenomenon, you could call it, whereby people are able to experience that universal consciousness, which is the pure spirit, basically, and that understanding and that realization that we literally are part of one being, one organism, and it's so uplifting to see that in action. Across the world, and to communicate with people who are essentially like your brothers and sisters, and to get to know them at a deeper level.
Amazing. I mean, it was a fantastic explanation of Sahaja and how it has been spreading all over the world. So I think we'll start with the first question. What's meditation for you, and why are you meditating, Tim?
It's kind of a difficult question to answer because I'm so used to meditating that it's a little difficult for me to remember how it was when I didn't. It's a way of as I said, maintaining your center, maintaining your axis, and if you get depleted in certain ways, if you're overactive, you're over busy, you can replenish that energy quite easily and regularly. Also, just it's a process of evolution, your own personal journey and also the journey of others. I would say it's more of a collective journey, really. But obviously there are things within you which can sometimes hamper your own experience of that collective journey, if you see what I mean. Mm-hmm. So it's about opening those knots within you. And those could be blockages on the chakras, or they could be conditionings in your mind, or they could be all kinds of self-impositions or things you've absorbed from a society or from your family or from possibly even previous lives. I mean, who knows? It's a very wide subject. So why do I meditate? It's to continue that process of growth, of evolution, and of maintaining my balance. So in practical terms, it's about meditating a little bit at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, just to kind of keep maintaining that connection and of kind of signing in or checking in. But even if I'm doing this now, I'm sort of working or whatever I'm working, I'm still conscious and aware of what's going on in my centers and of my relationship to around me. There's always a level of detachedness, a detached witness in what you're doing, and I guess the more you do it, the more able you are to have that, but without being alienated from what you're doing. Mm-hmm. I mean, what's great, to move on to the next question a little bit, I'm preempting it, but in acting, for example, if you're, or indeed music, if you stand back from what you're doing, you have to be careful about how you stand back from what you're doing, because it's very easy to become detached in a mental way, so that you start to judge what you're doing. So you say, oh, that was rubbish, I didn't like that, that was good. I was like, oh, that's all right, that's better than last time. As soon as you do that, you divide yourself from the spontaneous moment, and your performance, whether you're a musician, singer, or actor, starts to suffer, because you're analyzing what you're doing mentally, and you're not in the moment, you're not in it, as it were. But if you're in it in a detached way, but at the same time in the flow, then that's when you have that sort of mastery. So when the athlete hits that moment when they're in the zone, it's just all flowing. So all that practice, all that technique that you've been developing just comes into the present moment. It's there in your body without having to think about it. You know, you have access to those abilities, those, you could call them powers, but they're not really powers. They're just open channels. Mm-hmm. With that flow of energy going through, that's where you really achieve your optimum. Because you're not judging, you're not in a mental state, you're just in the flow of that, but you're aware and you have a slight ability to be detached, so you're not caught in that. I mean, one of the great things about that is it's like, you could call it like a Krishna state, whereby you're able to go off into one emotion and be extremely angry 1 second, come back to center, turn on a sixpence, and then go in another direction with a totally different emotion or a different thought. I mean, thought and emotion come together, really. They think, feel is the actor's craft, really. And then again, come back to center. So you're not stuck in one mode. And this is why sometimes people think that, like a music theatre piece or an opera theatre piece is extremely boring, because it's stuck in one emotion and it doesn't come out of that emotion. Happy face, sad face, literally. This is a happy song. La, 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 la. This is a sad song. And that's where it gets boring, because it hasn't got that creative flow, that life force coming into what you're doing. And it's about connecting with your deeper self. And that deeper self, ultimately, is part of the greater self, that collective unconscious. As Jung describes it, Carl Gustav Jung, that unconscious thing which unites us all, where we have connection with the archetypes. And again, those archetypes are anyway within us, within each of the chakras, the energy centers. And sometimes we specifically meditate on those archetypes to allow them to grow within us and to establish their qualities within us.
So basically we're saying also that kind of you can use these qualities of kind of self-understanding or understanding yourself better, not through meditation. And you can master this acting and creating different emotions and being detached from the scene, but at the same time being the present moment, no? Isn't
it? So it is a kind of an involvement with detachment. So it's not an involvement whereby you get lost in it. You're not lost in it. That's the point. But you're kind of, it flows through you. So it's an integral part of you. But you're not kind of clinging on to it. Suddenly a line of Blake came into my mind, but I don't know if I can recall it properly. It's like he who kisses the joy as it flies. I can't remember it now. I wish I could remember, but it's just got my brain. But it's about allowing that joy to manifest and not being attached to it and grabbing hold of it, but allowing it to fly and to be its own thing and to enjoy it for what it is, and allow it to subside for what it is, and not try to grab onto that moment.
Amazing. Amazing. I mean, probably I think you already answered the second question, but I will do this question anyway. So the second question would be, what are the challenges of your profession or your day-to-day life, and how meditation helps you deal with them?
Well, there's quite a lot of them, really. I mean, the acting profession, to talk about the acting profession specifically, because if we talk about too many professions, it gets more difficult. I've talked about how it goes to extremes and about the importance of maintaining our balance and our center. But that's true of everything. But I'd say acting, actually, Sahaja said one time that acting is the most difficult profession because it really gets into you. A lot of professions are kind of sort of at arm's length. You do your day's work, you finish, and then do whatever else you want to do in the evening. Acting is not like that. You're renting out your nervous system to a certain extent, and to put your attention on a certain kinds of people, you actually absorb some energy of those people. So it's if you're playing Christ or Krishna, it's great. You can channel that extraordinary energy of those particular spiritual personalities, and indeed manifest that. That's the great glory of that degree of connection, is that you can actually channel that living presence. So I'm not talking about, for example, the Krishna that lived 5,000 years ago, or the Christ that lived 2,000 years ago. I'm talking about that living essence which is now in the present and manifests in the world around us. Again, going back to those archetypes which I talked about, which reflect through the chakras, through the energy centers. So there's that extraordinary possibility, which you could call a sort of yogic kind of acting, which is about connection and union and flow and really channeling and manifesting, radiating these extraordinary living personalities, not the historical ones, the living ones. And I'm not talking about the religions that sprung up around them either, which could be construed as separate, different things almost, to some extent. I'm talking about the living force of these beings in the present. And the same is true, unfortunately, if you take like a serial killer or someone like Hitler or anything like that. Unfortunately, it's a similar kind of experience. And I've had to be in some productions where you've had to play some really horrendous characters, or audio books where I'm narrating horrendous stories, like Poland throughout the Second World War, for example, some of the dreadful experiences there. And you really have to maintain a very strong sense of center in order to be not knocked off by these incredibly painful emotions sometimes, which you're channeling again from this collective organism, which is the universal experience of humanity. I mean, what's so interesting about Sahaja Yoga and meditation is that actually you're able to, through your attention, to work out things in the past, in the present, and to some extent in the future because of the power of attention. You can direct this pure energy to work things which are still affecting the present now, but which occurred in the past. I mean, there's a lot of that going on. There's a very big sense, in a way, of there's quite a lot of stuff from the Second World War, especially, I feel, that's kind of working out at the moment. Lots of grandparents, karma, you could call it, which is coming to the fore at the moment in the world around us. And through meditating, it's possible to work that out for everybody, so that basically all of humanity evolves, and this kind of clash of ideas, this clash of countries and of what you could call ego positions and of conditionings, as people slowly come to a greater understanding. I mean, it's the clash of ideologies that was responsible for so much suffering and so much death in the 20th century. I mean, Chairman Mao, Stalin, Hitler, I mean, they're responsible for more deaths than anything in the history of humanity, including Spanish flu and all the other things that happened, bubonic plague and whatnot. So anyway, not to go down that particular dark avenue, but what it is that if you're able to come to your center, and to literally use a technique called foot soaking, for example, which we talk about, which is simply meditating in a bowl of water with salt in it, using the elements of water, using the elements of fire also, we're able to cleanse that away, and we're able to cleanse the whole collective organism. But it's not a quick process. It's going to take a long time.
Yeah. So I think there is interesting this part, and it's amazing this part of acting and working out kind of historical facts or even kind of word problems. But there is also this other aspect of, for example, intrigues and jealousy in actors when you are actually not acting. Also, to be an actor can be a bit of challenge.
Well, that's in some ways coping with rejection is one of the biggest things. I mean, I can't remember what the figures are, but they said something like in the acting profession, more than 80% of the profession is not working at any given time. I mean, it's also true that there's always a bunch of people that seem to be working all the time. I mean, there's always that element. But most actors go for a lot of job interviews. A lot. I mean, less so at the moment because there's literally no theatre and there's very little TV, although I did go for a TV interview just a few days ago in person, but that was specifically because it was BBC and it was public broadcasting, so it had a special dispensation as essential programming. But on the whole, there's not very much happening at the moment. But usually actors go for lots of regular interviews, and most of those they're not going to get. Especially for commercials. I mean, it's a numbers game, basically. So you have to be resilient. You have to be psychologically detached, and have what psychologists would call something other than an external locus of self, by which they mean that if you define who you are by what is inside of you, an internal locus of self, if you have a strong inner focus, that goes back to our axis, that goes back to our heart, our strong sense of self, of who we are, regardless of what else is out there, then it's much easier to take the endless knocks that you get, and also horrible criticism, bad reviews, sometimes completely unjustified, particularly now in this world of social media. I mean, there are some ridiculous things that I've seen on Audible about, audiobook reviews for some, like, that's the worst English accent I ever heard in my life.
Oh my God.
But this is an English person that you're talking about. This is an English person born in England, lived in England, worked in England, has never worked anywhere else, and yet you say they have a terrible English accent. Anyway, so not all of it's true by any means, but you need some, as I said, a strong sense of self. And what is the self? It's the pure spirit within us. And again, that's what is able to expand and manifest more in our daily life through meditating, through connecting with our pure divine essence. That's what I would call it. So that you have that strong axis, that strong sense of self. So if someone insults you or says something horrible, or it sounds almost like playground stuff, doesn't it? But basically, or rejects you, say, yeah, I like your audition, but actually we want to go with the other guy. Well, they may go with the other guy simply because that other guy fits the director's conception of what that character should look like.
Absolutely.
Or there may be another reason. We've already got the costume and they are a better fit, which does happen on major West End musicals. Yeah, you get a breakdown for a major West End musical that's been around for years. It'll say must be between this height and this height so that they can fit into the costume. That happens a lot, in spite of employment laws. But it's not about diversity. It's about literally just fitting into the costume.
Wow. Okay.
So that to them is more important than finding this amazing actor who's just an inch too short.
Amazing. And could you feel, for example, because you have already kind of I don't know, like 30 years career or even more perhaps, and could you feel that through meditation, all these rejections that you go along, could you actually improve your sense of self-confidence and perhaps of even like your confidence in yourself increase through the meditation? Could you feel that sort of progression?
Well, definitely. I mean, it's not as if you're going. It's not a straight line on a graph. I mean, there are times where you'll get knockbacks, but generally, definitely, the line is upwards. But it's as I said, it's not a straight line by any means, because there are times where you do have doubts. But that's not to say that's anything to do with your meditation practice. That's a separate career thing. Obviously, people as they go through creative careers, they will question whether they're doing the right thing, whether they're in the right genre, or whether they should change their technique, or whether they should take this class or that class and learn that other technique, which is maybe going to help them a little bit, or they may take a little bit of a slightly different turn. Like I said, in the last 5 to 10 years, I've been doing many more audiobooks than I was previously, and that's given me a lot of solidity career-wise, and has allowed me, in a way, to do more interesting things on the TV, film, and less so the theatre and opera front, because I've been doing less of that recently. But it's given me that solidity to allow me to do those extra projects that I necessarily before would have been more concerned about paying bills with. So I use audiobooks to pay my bills, and then my hands are freer to do the more creative stuff and even personal projects. I'm starting to get more time for what I would call pure creativity, which isn't, rather than being a hired hand and doing everyone else's project, helping them do their stuff, which is great because it pays the bills. I want to do stuff which has come from my own soul, my own heart, that I want to do, that have been, that express my own creativity, but not in an indulgent way, but fulfill my destiny as an artist, whatever you want to call it. Sounds a bit grandiose, but that's also what it is. And going back to meditation, you're saying yes, so it does increase your confidence, and there's in the heart is where that feeling of confidence is centered. But also, as you get to understand yourself in a deeper way, that you bring that understanding to your roles. I mean, I remember when I was at college as a student actor, I was very painfully conscious of all these young actors being absolutely blank. Full of enthusiasm, energy, and everything else. But in terms of experience and understanding and what life they were able to bring, they were absolutely blank, because life experience was basically watching TV, chatting with their friends, going on holiday, having a very dull but interesting life. But that's not what makes the work interesting. And I guess that's sometimes why the sort of the damaged ones are sometimes come across as the more interesting actors. But I would say it's not the damage that makes it interesting. It's that being in touch with your deeper self. Evil, I find boring. There's nothing more boring than evil. When you go into that divine quality, are able to go into those subtle emotions, all those subtle energies, and that subtle experience, and that the ways of expressing. It's so much more interesting. Evil in humanity begins with one simple thing: is the absence of heart. A complete absence of soul and heart, of compassion, of love for fellow beings. It begins with ego not giving any respect or any thought or feeling for any other being than itself. And this is extremely boring.
It's interesting because most actors, I think, they would prefer to. Actors, they would prefer to play the villains. They would prefer to play the enemies, the antagonists, right?
It depends. It depends, really. I suppose they would, for the most part. I mean, most part they would want to play as big a part as you could possibly be given. It's an extremely competitive profession, definitely. And survival is of the fittest. Literally, it's a jungle. It is literally a jungle. Although we have great friendships and great respect for people who are very, very skilled in what they do. But it is nonetheless extremely competitive, and you're reliant on your own abilities, energies, insights, experience, and everything else. But what's so wonderful about it is that each person is unique. And this is what's so wonderful also about coming back to the meditation, is that everyone's journey is not the same. Yes, it's a collective evolution. Yes, it's a collective unfolding, like a lotus opening like that, collective lotus. But we're all a different petal within that lotus. And the Sahasrara is a 1,000-petaled lotus of many, many, all the colors of the rainbow. And that's what we are. So we each have a different role to play. We have different qualities, and within that collective, we manifest those, and we, as it were, make up for each other's weaknesses. So my strength and my weakness will be very different to yours or to others, but as a group, as a collective being, we are strong. And we grow together as a result. Again, which why, as an international thing, it's such an amazing, glorious unfolding to see humanity in its extraordinary variety. Meditation isn't about sitting quietly and being very dull. It's not about that. there are moments where you have to go deep inside yourself to rejuvenate and to be in touch with your deeper self. But at the same time, there are moments where you manifest that, and the interplay between people is so glorious to watch, so fulfilling. That Kundalini within us is just a catalyst for that. It facilitates that. It's the flow from one thing to the next. It's a dynamic exchange of energy, actually, extremely dynamic. And that is expressed when we come together, when we sing songs together, dance together, just talk together, exchange ideas, emotions, whatever that might be. And that's a whole different side to it.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, especially coming from an actor, because I'm sure that acting, especially in plays, now you need to feel the audience, or when you're singing. So there is this sort of collective experience that's been taking place, and I think what's very interesting, it's your approach
that's how
also.
It came out. That's literally how theatre started, really. In Sanskrit theatre, ancient Sanskrit theatre, also more familiar to us, is Greek theatre. I mean, it was a sacred space whereby the actor and the audience were communing with emotions or psychological processes that were extremely difficult for a society to address and deal with. And so this was a safe way in which they could be explored and the issues played out in dramatic form as a community. So it is, in that respect, part of an evolutionary growth. And the glory of theatre is that it's present, it's alive at that moment in that time. And when they do it again tomorrow, it's going to be different, because it's a different audience with a different set of life energies, whatever you want to call them, or experience, psychological makeup. And it's never going to be the same. And it isn't ever the same.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that were kind of really interesting that you said, it's about kind of your subtle approach. You were saying that, for example, it's much better to represent like Christ, to act like Christ, than to do like a villain. And this takes us
like Christ. This is the subtle difference. Is you're not being like Christ. You're opening yourself to channel that energy. So it's a slightly different thing. So you're not trying to be like Christ. You're literally opening yourself to manifest the actual thing.
Yeah, amazing. And it's kind of a very kind of subtle approach, I think, to acting. And this for sure leads us to kind of the experience that you had in India. And this leads us also to the question, because we were talking before about what's the difference between meditation and yoga?
Right. Okay. So as I said before, there's a short way of answering this question and a very long way. So I'll try and go through the medium way. But first, the short answer is there's no difference whatsoever, really, at its essence and historically. Yoga and meditation are simply a state of thoughtless awareness. So if you're in yoga or if you're in meditation, you're in the same state. But in the last 120 years, the label of yoga has come to mean very specifically postural yoga, which is basically more to do with fitness and about general health and well-being. But if you go back to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Bhagavad Gita, and all the ancient scripts, or even the Rig Veda, or all the Vedas and the Upanishads, they describe very, very clearly that what meditation is, what yoga is a state of thoughtless awareness. They don't literally use that term, thoughtless awareness, but it is that whereby you enter into a pure consciousness. You're absolutely aware of everything within you and around you, but there's not this endless thinking process going on. So it is above the mind. It's above the emotions, it's above the mind, above the intellect, which is slightly separate from the mind, which is more the imaginative quality, the emotional side to the mind, and the body, and all these things which are physical or mental or created, one could say. and we go to the pure essence of reality, the pure essence of being, the truth of who we are. It connects us with that. What none of the traditional books will describe is exactly how Sahasrara works, and what is specific and special about what Sri Mataji has given us as Sahaja Yoga is that with the Sahasrara chakra opening, that's the top center on the top of the head, the crown chakra, with this opening, it has created a very new situation whereby en masse self-realization, that is the awakening of the Kundalini energy within us, that spiritual potential within us, is much more possible en masse. Before, we were literally stuck at this chakra here. So that's why a lot of the kind of yogas previously would talk about focusing on the third eye, because that chakra at that time was open. But now we're at the level of what we call the Sahasrara, which is the crown chakra. And there's very little said about the Sahasrara chakra until Sri Mataji explained its functioning. And it is literally the collective being, as I mentioned earlier. And the ability to feel as one and to experience as one and to act as one, that oneness of pure being. And that's very different from doing a few exercises and looking at a chart and moving your body and sitting around. I mean, the original purpose of those postures, the asanas, was to literally open the chakras. So you do a particular asana, a particular posture, which would help open, say, for example, the first chakra, the Muladhara, and another one would help with another. So, bit by bit, you would improve through these exercises each of the chakras. And then hopefully, once the chakras were strong, then through the help of a master, a teacher, a yoga guide, you would be able to then awaken the Kundalini. But this was a very rare event, it wouldn't happen very often. And if you were lucky, it was when one great master would pass it on to one great student. And then, you can imagine it's very, very few people. But now, since Sahaja Yoga, it's possible to have this en masse. And there are literally at least hundreds of thousands, if not millions. It's difficult to quantify exactly how many of people using this technique of Kundalini awakening and of meditating daily across the world, everywhere, nearly everywhere.
I think most people kind of nowadays, they feel the necessity somehow to calm down the thoughts. That's why kind of you have mindfulness and you have a lot of popularity around meditation. And I think most of people, they really don't know this kind of, they don't have this knowledge about yoga and where actually it came from.
Yeah, there's a lot of misconception. I mean, yoga basically, as a sort of postural yoga, basically sort of became very much popularized in the West. First of all, under the British Raj, really, there was a resurgence of Indian culture, and the British government in India kind of allowed the resurgence of yoga in the form only as a form of exercise, a physical exercise, and they were basically disallowed from the more philosophical and spiritual ideas that went with it. And this also translated to when it went more into the West. So particularly in the 1920s in America, there were a lot of practitioners that went to America and started establishing these new yoga techniques, but they're all essentially postural yoga, not giving realization, i.e. not giving Kundalini awakening, although originally that was the purpose. Purpose then became well, as I mentioned before, governments became super aware of public health after the First World War, after it was realized that most populations, certainly among the Allies, but all through the world really, were actually in quite poor state. Poor nutrition, poor exercise, lots of kind of chronic diseases, low level and mid level and high level to some extent, chronic diseases. And so public health became much more of a priority, particularly as the spectre of another war came along. And so entrepreneurs essentially who wanted to popularize postural yoga took this opportunity to spread new movements of yoga, and then the emphasis became very much on exercise and postures and improving the body and with it the mind. But yoga is not about the body. Yoga is not about the mind either. It's about going beyond them. So stilling the mind, having a peaceful mind, is part of that, but that's the big, I'd say, the beginning of the process. So why can't we meditate? Well, what stops us meditating? Well, generally what happens is that we have, through our daily lives, it pushes us often to extremes, and so we kind of drain ourselves in one aspect or another. We tend to sort of repeat patterns of behavior, either because of how we live or because of our jobs. So, for example, as an actor, I get a lot of strain on the right side because of the amount of energy that's needed to do that, particularly, for example. I get a lot of strain on the throat chakra because of use of the voice. But someone else would have a very different experience. For example, someone that works on a computer all day is not going to be using their voice very much, but they'll be probably likely mentally very, very heated up on the right channel, particularly in the second center, the Swadhisthana chakra, which is, again, projecting and planning into the future. So particularly with that, it creates a heat in the body. It creates a pressure on the right channel, the side of action, physical and mental. And in order for us to be able to meditate, we actually first need to bring ourselves into balance. So you could say there are at least two stages in the meditative process. One is bringing ourselves into balance, and the second is then establishing us in a meditative state, which is thoughtless awareness, whereby we're not stuck inside the brain with these two lawyers in our head arguing about this and arguing about that, deciding what we're going to have for dinner, or replaying in our mind something that someone said yesterday that we're still upset about and we haven't forgiven them for and never will. And so we have to sort of ease those pressures within our being. But it's only really by awakening the Kundalini that you can have a sustained, thoughtless state. You can use various cooling techniques, which both physical and, for example, using the breath. Breath is very, very excellent for taking you out of the mental and establishing you in a centered kind of non-physical, non-mental centeredness. But if you want to sustain that, it's really only possible when the Kundalini energy actually rises up through this center here, which we call Agya chakra, in the center of the forehead, and then pierces the fontanelle into the crown chakra and establishes our Kundalini at that point. At the point of yoga, you could say this is the point of union, the point of yoga, above our heads. And when we establish that, and it happens very spontaneously, actually, it's completely effortless. It's a mistake to think that it's hard or difficult. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to undo the knots which stop it coming up, but that's different. That's a different thing. Actually, meditating itself is as simple as breathing. It's a very natural, spontaneous thing. It's like sometimes I remember singing. What kind of breath should you take for singing? It's just like nothing is required, just as much as it takes to smell a flower. That sense of ease and effortlessness is the same with the meditation. And in fact, the more you try, the more effort you put in, the more likely you are to push yourself either onto the right side, which is the overactive side, or onto the emotional side, which is the left side. And this is generally actually what has happened in the past, is that there's been a right side movement, which is all these stories that we think about of ancient sages turning other people to ashes or throwing stones at them. is generally because of this extreme movement onto the right side. And again, it's a furious kind of individualistic ascent. Or on the other side, these people who become very emotional, what they call the bhakti in India, the devotion side of it. But if it's not a balanced bhakti, if it's not a balanced devotion, then it just becomes like an emotional myth. So you have this imaginative relationship with some deity or whatever, with some concept. And you have this idea of a relationship with a divine presence, but you're not actually connected with the divine presence itself. That's what's interesting about the Gnostics. They talk about the angel of the divine presence. And so they were very, very much aware that when you feel that energy of the cool breeze on your hands, it is like a divine presence. Which is why it's a verifiable experience. And that's what sets the reality apart from a technique which is about mind control or motion control, but it's not like taking that spontaneous leap into the spirit, that pure spirit, which is by its character a completely different thing. It's much beyond ourselves. It's our greater self. As I said, it touches the collective self, the greater collective self.
Wow, that's amazing. I really can see kind of also the kind of your whole kind of choice of profession. It's all kind of a spiritual journey, isn't it? I would say like all like the choice of acting, singing. It's also kind of a way to be connected to this kind of divine power.
As an individual, I have a need whereby I need to be in something which is what they might term expressive. So I need to be able to channel, to express my heart basically through what I'm doing, and to involve myself in what I'm doing at a deep level. And if I'm not able to do that, I get extremely frustrated. But that's not to say that involvement, you get lost in it. It is possible to get lost in it in a bad way. And that's again why you have to keep bringing yourself back to center and back onto your axis, so that, you're not defined by what you do. You should never be defined by what you do. You should never be called, oh, you are an architect, therefore you behave like this, you dress like this, you look like this. No, you should be yourself, who just happens to be doing architecture as the way you develop your own positive growth, positive energies. Because if you don't use what God has given you, what the divine has given you, then it becomes a negative force. And I do people that have given up what they've done creatively because they're, for whatever reason, usually because they're not able to sustain themselves and pay the bills, and they go into teaching or something which is like a sort of something that they don't really want to do. I mean, there are plenty of people that are perfectly suited to teachers and should be teachers, but there are also people that go into things like that simply because they haven't been successful at what they really wanted to do. Similarly, there are people in the acting profession who are there because, and the singing profession as well, who are there because they treat it like a form of therapy. And those people never survive in the profession. It's not about individual therapy. And I think there's drama schools and music colleges are largely culpable in the way that they cultivate an environment which attracts that and doesn't necessarily sift out the people who are likely to be in that category. What we call workshop junkies. They just love doing workshops and are never really serious about the professional, or are psychologically suited for the knockbacks and all the other things that we have to be resilient towards. And that, again, that having to have that strong sense of inner self in order to maintain yourself. There are a lot of people that go into the professions who are just what they call wannabes. They're just famous. They don't actually care what they're famous for. They could be famous for robbing a bank for all they care. They just want to be famous, and that's another negative aspect of where society has got to at this present point. reflected in the media. But that's also about a lack of introspection, which is part of our current societal makeup. I mean, one of the positives of COVID-19 is that people are starting to introspect more deeply, I think, and question about what kind of life they have and where their life is going and what life is about. What is important. I think a lot of people are totally rearranged how they think it is important.
That's true.
Simply because certain things are not possible anymore. And I think people certainly value collective relationships and collective groups and support groups much more than they did before. In what is essentially a rather selfish society. A society which is built on materialism, a society which is built on individualism, rather than a nurturing society which is focused more on collective and individual growth within that. I mean, the collective is strong because the individuals are strong. It has to be a collective sense within that.
Absolutely.
I mean, look at where materialistic ego has taken us. It's taken us to the brink of extinction with the environmental problem. The environmental problem is not such a difficult problem to solve. It's because mankind itself is out of balance. If mankind could re-find its balance en masse, or in enough mass for it to matter, then ecological problem would not take very long to sort.
Yeah.
Because we are making demands on the planet, totally unreal demands. It's not just because of population growth and population numbers. It's because of what that growing population is doing and demanding of the planet that is the problem.
Yeah,
out of balance humanity equals an out of balance planet, and then an out of balance planet could literally result in the end of humanity if we're not careful.
No, absolutely. I think it's really about kind of this collective awareness, and it's all kind of about meditation. Really, it's about kind of being connected, integrated with the whole. And I think, Tim, we will have to finish for today. It was great talking to you. Otherwise, it would be way too long. But it was amazing. I think it was kind of really nice to hear you also talk to so much passion and so much kind of love for the things that you do, both acting and also meditating. And I think they are kind of, as you said, they are integrated in a way. It's a way kind of to make yourself evolve.
No, I mean, I think without the meditation, I wouldn't have survived. I would not have survived without the meditation in the acting profession. Definitely not.
I can imagine. So I would just like to finalize, kind of reminding everyone that every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. we have our online meditations in the Zoom sessions, and you're all welcome to come. And I don't know, Tim, if you want to just to finalize with some sort of a message for everyone.
What to say? I'd say just keep meditating, even if you feel that you're not quite getting anywhere at the moment. Just keep going. Just keep going, because sometimes it feels like you're facing up one of those particular knots within yourself, and sometimes it takes a little bit longer than you would like. So you just have to have great patience with yourself, great love for yourself, and just keep going, basically.
Amazing. Perfect. Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.